The reason I think Mount Everest matters is I have a reverence for it because the vast majority of people I've seen and experienced climbing it with, from mountain guides to professional athletes to Sherpa to clients, they come back changed because the outcome was truly unknown and they were pushed physically, mentally, and emotionally to their limits. Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Keykeper. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
Welcome back. This is episode 31 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. Today, Adrian and I are going to be doing a little bit of a season recap about Everest. We've talked a lot about Everest over the last, year and a half, 2 months, but people have asked for kind of a recap. And so we want to just circle the wagons a little bit and close out the Everest 2025 season. It was a great season with some challenge, and we're going to kind of dive into some specific topics in this episode. But first, we're going to try a little bit of a new format for our news segments. We are each going to bring a topic to the table and chat about it briefly after, catching up briefly and see how it goes. So Adrian, how's it going?
It's going great. It's fun to be home. You might be sick of Everest, but I'm not. We're going to talk about Everest a lot more in the next few weeks of podcasts. I've got a feeling, Sam, we got some great guests coming up and things like that. But for me, I'm like just starting to get a little distance from Everest, right? Like I've been home 10 days now. I think I'm over jet lag. I've gotten, I'm not going to say my fill of, but quite a bit of lake time, baby arrow time.
He's not a baby anymore. He's a full-grown toddler.
Little kid arrow time, time with Emily, time in the sun. I got my first sunburn of the season because, I still haven't learned to put on enough sunscreen. It was actually with you on the Via Ferrata. Just burned the crap out of myself.
And actually, you put sunscreen on before we went for a run, and I didn't, and I escaped.
Yeah, but then I took my shirt off.
Yep.
And certainly you're not spending much time on Everest with your shirt off. So, I've rock climbed a few times. I know exactly how weak I am now, but I'm super, super fired up about it. And it's a great start to summer, which gives me a little space from Everest. And I'm excited to talk about some of our kind of like interesting moments from the season and from the industry as well. But here, since I am back in Tahoe in California in the summer, that's got me thinking about rock climbing. So my news item this week is not Everest focused or even 8,000 meter focused. It's rock focused. While I was away on Everest, the spring season in Yosemite happened. So while people of course climb year round in Yosemite, kind of the two best seasons, especially for big wall climbing, are in the spring, kind of April and May, and then again in the fall, October and November. The spring season can be really wet, kind of depending on how much snow there was in the Sierra. This year was kind of an average year here, and so things melted out pretty efficiently. And so I was interested to see what would happen in Yosemite. There were lots of pros there. I hear it was a very busy season. There were days on LCAP where some friends were like, oh, I didn't even want to go up there. There were so many teams on routes like Freerider and things like that. And I think it's easy to get sucked into that. But I think we just all need to be super fired up about more people doing the sports we love. This is a soapbox I've stood on a lot, Sam, so I won't stand on it for too long. But I think it's all about finding ways to be more efficient, to choose less common objectives if it is your choice to kind of avoid the popular spots, but I don't think we should be complaining about the popular spots. And as we see more and more climbers coming to these places and testing themselves on things like free climbing on LCAP, remarkable things happen. So a news story that we probably mentioned months ago was when Babsi and Jacopo attempted to free climb a route on LCAP, freerider, and flash it, do it without any falls. That's kind of like one of the purer styles or things people try to attain. So not only climbing a route from bottom to top, where when you fall, you lower back down and climb that rope length again. That would be called freeing the route. To flash the route, you do every single pitch without falling. You can have watched videos, you can have loads of information or beta about the climb, but you can't ever fall or weight the rope on a pitch. If you do that, you didn't flash the route. And to do that 30 something times, because there's 30 something rope lengths on a route like freerider from bottom to top without a single mistake, has never been accomplished before. Babsi last season succeeded last fall. Jacopo took one fall, so he didn't actually succeed, but Babsi did it. And I think they did it over about 5 days, give or take. So they were able to rest each night, recover on a ledge, even take a rest day on the route, and then continue up to make sure that they were as strong as possible on each pitch. It was considered a real moment in the sport, a moving of the bar that a route on LCAP has now been flashed. Well, this spring, a kid, I'm going to call him a kid. He's in college. He's in Boulder. His name is Will Moss. He's actually in his early 20s, former comp climber, learned to trad climb only 5 years ago, probably as his comp climbing career was winding down. He started trad climbing in New York in the Schwannegunks, where he lived before moving out to Boulder. He had a dream of freeing a route on LCAP and wanted to try to flash based on his skill set and kind of his goals. He came out this spring. He planned on trying to flash freerider over 3 days. He did the first 10 pitches, called the free blast, and felt great and decided to just keep going, which is a huge risk because you only get one chance in life to flash a route. Once you've fallen once, you can never flash it again because now you know certain pitches. You've climbed them before. So he had this plan to do it over 3 days. By continuing, he shifted his goal to trying to do it in one push. And the potential must have been so great that he ultimately failed and that goal was gone. He could never try again. But he had this feeling, he had this belief. He ended up flashing the freerider, no falls in 22 hours. And so I just love stories like this, where something that seemed impossible for the best climbers in the world was proven to be possible last season, flashing over 4 or 5 days. And then someone believed in themselves, knew that ceiling was gone, is now possible to flash, wanted to be the second person to do it, and then did it in a remarkably, I'm not going to say better style, but wow style in less than 24 hours. To do that much hard climbing in that little time with that little rest is completely moving the bar again. And I just love it. Our sport, climbing and skiing, there is just so much happening. And we've talked before about this idea of people with a lot more training and maybe professional coaching and things like that from childhood. They're going to show us things that we just think were totally impossible. And it excites me. Go Will Moss.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I think too, what interests me about that is, for so long, progression in these sports was about harder routes, climbing harder, pushing the grades. And we've kind of reached a point where certainly grades are still being pushed, but there's a lot of emphasis in doing things faster or doing things with, fewer prep days or however the style is changing. And at times, style change is almost more impressive than a minor grade push. Going from 515B to 515C or 515C to 515D is it's such a marginal change, and it's a area in which 99.9% of climbers can't even conceptualize how difficult that is and how hard it is to push. But doing things faster or doing things in better style is something that everyone can really appreciate and experience at their own grades. And so it kind of, allows people to relate to these achievements in a different way that I think is really cool, and seeing the sport change in different ways rather than just, constantly getting harder. So cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about style because I think it does have such a component in the sports we do, since there aren't rigid rules in our sports like there are in the traditional sports spaces. And so we as a community have to decide like what we kind of put up on a pedestal or what we aspire to, and style inevitably becomes a part of that conversation. So and I think you're right. It's some of these accomplishments that very clearly understandable. Like free soloing LCAP, when that finally happened, free riders, like just so easy to understand. You had to go from the bottom to the top without falling, because if you fell, the consequence was very, very clear, right? And this is another one where it's like, oh, someone can really understand that. Even though they had a rope, they couldn't fall, not once.
Yeah, they wouldn't have the achievement
Without that. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that is not to take away anything from the pushing of harder grades. Like I also just love that side of the sport so much, and I think we're going to see remarkable pushing of grades happening in the next decade as the comp kids keep coming out. And then we're going to see it in sport climbing, and then we're going to see it in trad climbing. We already are, and that's really exciting to me as well. But I do know what you mean. Like you're never going to be able to look at a route. None of us can really look at a route and recognize the difference between a 515C or D, but we can certainly understand this difference of falling versus not falling, rehearsing versus not rehearsing.
I know the difference between a 510 and a 515, and that is one I can climb and one I can't, but that's about it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exciting. What's your news?
Well, it's kind of along the same lines. You know, throughout the Everest season, we were talking about what was going on in the Himalaya, and there was a lot going on. And we kind of, I think, failed to mention all of the cool, things going on in the Alps. And particularly for me, my sport is predominantly skiing and ski mountaineering. And there was nothing like necessarily like totally groundbreaking that happened in the Alps and in the Chamonix area throughout the spring, but it just felt like every week there was incredible steep skiing going on throughout the Alps. And it was really cool to be hearing like, different lines that were done, maybe a first descent or a second descent that hadn't happened in 20 years, or, an FKT, or, someone doing a big link up. It just felt like this spring season in the Alps, and particularly in the Chamonix Valley, was like bonkers in terms of conditions, and also just people being there at the right time and pushing what's done in ski mountaineering. And I don't know if you have any like notable ones that stick out to you, but really it was just cool to see like for 6 weeks straight, it felt like people were getting after it in the Alps, in this steep skiing mecca, and just having the time of their lives and doing not just hard things or scary looking things, but also just like cool passion projects that maybe they've looked at over years, and the conditions finally lined up for them to get out there.
Yeah, I'm so with you. I was like kind of like following along day by day with kind of like Alps late spring, early summer ski season, and how good it was. And second year in a row that they've had a really excellent, stable kind of late season where the steep stuff actually gets done. So it was certainly very fun to see. I mean, the two stories that obviously caught my eye was all the ski speed records being broken on Mont Blanc, men's and women's FKTs, so fastest known times. The round trip from the church in Chamonix to the summit, back down to the church. These were all ski records, again, because we're talking about the ski conditions, and ski should in general be faster than climbing because the descent is so much faster. So it was great to see the men's record get broken by Ben Vedrine, and then the women's record get broken, and then Ben's record get broken again a week later by another 20 minutes. And to me, the exact times are just kind of like you said about rock climbing, like bonkers. We're talking about like 4+ hours round trip.
And vertical gain of 3,000 meters.
Yeah, so 10,000 feet, maybe a little bit, I think more actually, a little bit more, over complicated terrain. Just remarkable. The women's record is down into the 6-ish hour range now. And the fact that there are so many young, talented climber skiers in the Alps, like the Alps community is just putting out some incredible athletes, and always has for the past 100 years. But right now, they are just on a tear. And
what do you like most about them? They're all mountain guides, huh?
Yeah, they are all mountain guides. It's about the culture of the mountain guide. Like, obviously, I'm biased on this because it's what I've struggled to be competent at for so long. But like, I love the fact that these athletes coming out believe, like, kind of in the Waterman model of being a mountain athlete, that you must be a great trail runner. You must be a phenomenal skier. You must be a fantastic rock climber. And of course, alpine climbing ties it all together
and they're all paragliding.
Yeah, paragliding, like that's the next step. But like the fact that they endeavor to excel at all of those because they're all ways of moving through the mountains, it speaks to me. Like, that's what I love to do. And Ben's been on our radar for a bit, right? Because of his K2 climb, 11 hours base camp to summit, no supplemental oxygen, and then a paragliding flight off the top. That changed like the Himalaya, the 8,000 meter peak game. So he's doing these things in the Alps, and he's using the Alps for training for the Great Ranges. And that to me, obviously, is also like, I think, of course, I want every climber who wants to be a real alpinist to also go and climb in the Greater Ranges and learn altitude, because it's such a different game as well. And he's doing it all. We just saw another news story pop up today, I think, as we were about to go on, that he just skied all 4 faces of Mont Blanc in less than 24 hours.
I think it was 21 hours. Yeah, just absurd.
And like, I've only skied one of the faces of Mont Blanc, so like I even need to like go and read and learn more, and like, but that, like, I'm totally inspired to go and learn more. It's like, how much vert was that? How difficult was the skiing? Like, what were the conditions? Because if they were good on one side, they probably totally sucked on the other side. And it's like, how did he put that together? Yeah, I just love it. And I love that he's, finding projects at home in his backyard like we do here in the Tahoe and Sierra. And then he's also going to the biggest mountains in the world and proving his skills do carry over to those places.
Well, let's get him on the podcast, Adrian. What are we doing here?
I'll send an ask out. I'm sure he's not busy at all.
Yeah, it's cool what's going on in the Alps, and the Chamonix Valley is just such an iconic place for ski mountaineering to begin with, and Mont Blanc being right there, and the classic FKT. I think it's worth noting that I think it's a special and unique FKT in that, like, you're starting in a town, and you're starting at a church, and you're not skinning or skiing a lot of the bottom of the route. There is running in ski boots. Oftentimes you see these athletes in shorts before they're going to go up to a 4,000 plus meter peak and then ski back down. And the equipment package and the style and the strategy that's going into this is just amazing to watch. It's like so far from what we're used to backcountry skiing and ski touring, yet it works and it's pretty rad.
Yeah, I really love it. I think because I've been thinking a lot about FKTs on Mount Everest because of the athletes trying to do that this season and the athletes I've seen try to do it in the past, I fully respect that there are many different styles of FKTs and different ways to like set them up and where to start, where to finish. Are they up only or up or down and all these different things? But like, I almost feel like this should be like a premier class of FKTs. Like, there are lots of FKTs, and then there's the FKTs.
Yeah.
And like the Mont Blanc from the church to the church, like that just is the best style FKT that I can imagine. And I would love to see that. And I'm sure it has, but I don't run the FKT site, but if I did, I'd be putting little like stars next to the ones like that. Like, I've always thought the north side of Everest should be from the Rongbuk Monastery, the last really rad spot that every tourist that goes to the north side of the Everest has to see and spend time. It should be from there to the top and back to there. On the south side, I think, of Everest, I think we could debate what that like last premier place is. But I'm pretty sure it's not like a random tent and base camp that moves by up to an hour from year to year. It's like, let's make it the, Namche Bazaar, the most famous town in the valley. Or, if we want it to be the last town, make it the last town. But Aconcagua, same way. Like, the rad records from Aconcagua, I love when they start from the road, from the trailhead, not from a random place we put a tent. So that's my vote, and there is no more important classic and kind of like special one than Mont Blanc from the church.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should probably do a full episode on FKTs because it's a topic that has kind of like infiltrated our world, especially since COVID. COVID shut down a lot of racing, and then people pivoted and started going after these FKTs. And I feel like FKTs were a big deal, since before COVID, but COVID really brought them to the forefront of these sports. And we should do a full episode on FKTs because there's a lot to debate and discuss. And the reality is it's still reasonably new. When we're talking about style, I think the style is still being figured out because, a lot of these FKTs are like, you're breaking a record that no one ever intended to set. It just was a record to date. And now you're trying to break it. And until these records get established like Mont Blanc and then they get pushed and they're brought down to these super competitive times, is it really an FKT or are you just like currently the fastest person to do some obscure objective?
And what's the most famous FKT in the States? Is it the Grand Teton?
I mean, that's kind of what comes to mind. And there's obviously a lot to talk about there, and we're not going to dive into it now. But I would imagine the Grand Teton, but I don't know. I mean, I think, there's like obviously climbing FKTs in the Grand Teton, but then how do you compare that to the Pacific Crest Trail on the totally other end of the spectrum where there's no climbing, but you're talking about monstrous distances. And, I think the fastest known time on the Pacific Crest Trail is like an absurd, 50 something days, which is equally as impressive as a 2-hour round trip on the Grand Teton, just completely opposite ends of the spectrum. So
absolutely. Yeah. My mind automatically went to mountains, but you're right. FKTs probably started actually on trails like the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail and things like that, and those were probably the more notable ones that athletes every year were trying to break and shorten and have been.
Yeah.
But of course, my mind goes to mountains.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, we'll circle back on FKTs, but coming up, we want to chat about Everest and do a little bit of a recap. We want to hear about Alpenglow's team and experience, and also talk about some of the kind of hot topics on both sides of the mountain and the stories that have, infiltrated the media and have made it all the way back here to the US. So we'll get your take coming up shortly. All right, welcome back to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. This is episode 31, and today we're talking about the Everest season. We're going to do a little bit of a recap. These are all topics that we've kind of discussed in one way, shape, or form over the last 2 months, and we kind of just wanted to do a full recap and make sure that we're not missing anything and we're giving appropriate airtime to all these interesting, factors from the last 2 months of the Everest season. So there's kind of 4 main topics that we want to talk about today. And the 4 are deaths and rescues, Anya Blacha, who summited Everest with no oxygen, FKT attempts from Carl Egloff and Tyler Andrews, and the whole Xenon climbing debacle, let's call it, even though it was a success.
Strong word.
I'm calling it a debacle. So Adrian, why don't you want to kick us off with deaths and rescues? What did the season bring, and how does that feel as far as the Everest season?
Sure. And I guess before diving in, one more topic that we're not talking about today, but kind of more saving is, I think the Alpenglow season deserves, the season I was actually working on, deserves, lots of people have been writing in being like, give us more. We want more of a blow by blow, like highs, lows, how it all finished out. Cause it's just like, oh, we summited it. It was amazing. We had the best day ever. Peace. And so I think that's coming up in a future episode of the Duffel Shuffle, hopefully with a guest. So you don't just have to listen to me. But yeah, so recapping Everest without a focus on kind of like what I was actually doing or we were doing. I think deaths and rescues are a good place to start. And I think they're a good place to start because we all get a lot of our news from social media, of course, mostly from social media. Most of the news on Everest comes from commercial for-profit companies, including my own. And so most of the news you'll read about this year's Everest season was about summits and about successes. And very little of the news you'll read suddenly from the operators is about, of course, deaths and rescues. But I think it's also important. There's very little news out there even about like overall how many people succeed, how many people don't succeed. Lots of operators like to use funny math to say they had 100% success rate on the mountain. We saw a lot of that this year. And maybe that's a good place to start. Like, I was on the north side of the mountain. I can say with certainty that not a single company on the north side had a 100% success ratio this season on the mountain. And so anyone you saw saying 100% success, it wasn't true. And so, that's kind of a strong statement. Like, I think it's important to know, like, the operators, I think they know what they're doing with numbers, but I think there's a lot of justification going on in their head. So if you actually dive into success numbers for a company, oftentimes, if you can get someone to actually go on the record, they'll tell you, the way they do summit success rates is from people who left Camp 4 and went on to the summit. So on Summit Push on day 35 or day 28 or day 6 or day 110, this many people left for the summit and this many people summited. The vast majority of teams will have 100% success ratios when they count who left for the summit from Camp 4, because summit day is not the difficult day of the expedition. It's not, even though it is very, very difficult, it's very much not what causes failure. Failure happens because you're essentially running a marathon day after day after day on Mount Everest, not because of just one day. So if you don't count all the people that didn't summit because they went home on day 10 or day 20 or day 60 or whatever it is, or because you told them to stay in Camp 2 instead of Camp 3 or Camp 4 because they didn't have it, they don't get counted in this kind of funny number that some people use. And it's total horseshit. So first, soapbox of Adrian's for this episode. How many do I get?
And that's your only one. You got your only soapbox. It's interesting. You mentioned that, and I just pulled up Alan Arnett's Everest 2025 season wrap up, and he has some unofficial figures. And so I will preface this that they're unofficial. They're based on very good data, but they're not finalized. And his data shows that there were 517 foreign nationals granted climbing permits on the Nepal side of Everest. And they're estimating with very good data to support the estimate that 257 clients had success. So that's about 50%, almost exactly, success of the permits issued and the successful climbers. Obviously, there's some factors there that these numbers aren't accounting for, like maybe obviously not all of the 517 permits were granted to clients of companies that were being guided, and the 257 number is a guided client number, but roughly 50% success, I think, is a fair figure to look at. And, that is not near 100.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. Like, of course, I can tell you Alpenglow's summit ratio is better than 50%, as you would expect it to be. But
that wasn't intended to be a softball for you to pitch your company.
Not at all. This is the reality. Like, climbing Mount Everest and standing on the top and coming down alive is incredibly hard still. And I think that gets lost sometimes. And it's partly the fault of the industry why it's being lost. And so we still have clients. Sometimes Alpenglow is pretty good at explaining this on calls and texts and Zooms before we get to the mountain. But we'll still occasionally have someone who thinks that the overall summit ratio on Everest is 80 or 90%. And that since they've put the time in, checked all the boxes, gone with a really good company, they will almost certainly summit. And the reality is I actually feel like in most years, it's more than half of the people who go to Mount Everest will fail. And that's while we always endeavor to increase our success ratio, if the industry ever got consistently to 100%, I no longer think the essence of what Mount Everest is would still be there. And I think we might talk a little bit about that when we get into Xenon, topic number 4. But Everest is still super hard, and these numbers show that. The other side of that is this was an interesting season in that we only had 5 fatalities on the mountain, and we say only, that's still a huge number.
But to put it in comparison, 2023 was 18.
Yep.
So, that was a record high, and this is, a lot less than 18.
Yeah, but when you think about what I mean by incredibly high is imagine any other situation in life where you have 1,000 people approximately, let's say 1,500 people, hanging out for 2 months, 1 to 2 months. 5 will die. It's kind of Squid Games-ish. There's not many other things in the world you do recreationally that have those types of statistics. And I don't think we should sugarcoat it. Even a remarkably lucky year on Everest, which is what I'm going to call those 5 deaths, because it doesn't match many past years. A remarkably lucky year where there was no catastrophic event in the icefall or on the Lhotse face, and where most of the people who got in trouble got down, is still a incredibly dangerous endeavor. And so, I mentioned that again because I think I hope lots of potential people interested in climbing Mount Everest listen to this podcast, and I encourage everyone who has a passion for the mountains to attempt to climb Mount Everest, but take it seriously. 5 deaths, I think, split about half and half between workers and foreign climbers. Without diving too deep into specifics, I think, an important thing is that from someone with a lot of experience on these mountains, when we hear about things like deaths happening because of high altitude sickness or unknown causes or what gets put into heart attack or exhaustion, while certainly some may be unavoidable, the majority of these fatalities we see over the years are avoidable, and they're caused by people going up higher than they should based on their ability, whether that's fitness or skills or exhaustion level, things like that. So without getting into specifics of any of these, my general feeling is a majority probably still can be avoided by companies with, strong expedition leadership and a conservative approach to the mountains.
Yeah. And I think, it's important to also acknowledge that while 5 deaths is a arguably low number, considering a near record number of climbers and, past seasons having significantly more fatalities than just 5, the number of rescues, near misses, cases of frostbite, et cetera, were record highs. And it kind of goes back to what do you consider success? Stumbling into base camp with, minutes to live and your fingers are all black and your toes are all black. Is that really success on the mountain? Or is that a near miss where someone truly got lucky? And I think that oftentimes the media likes to focus on summit success and the media likes to focus on deaths. And there's no conversation around rescues, frostbite, near misses. The list goes on. And it's an interesting thing to consider. And we don't have nearly as good a data, but it sounds like Global Rescue, one of the leaders in, high altitude rescue services and insurance around that. Global Rescue was on pace for record number of rescues in Nepal in the month of May alone. They had over 100, and before the climbing season was over, they estimated that they would be north of 130, which was their record from previous seasons. So I think it's worth noting that while the figures around fatalities and the figures around summit success were in favor, there was a lot that wasn't covered by the media.
Yep. This is another hobby horse or soapbox moment for me. I think, first of all, just wrapping up one thought I had, I do want to express condolences to everyone who lost someone they loved on the mountain this year. It's Monday morning quarterbacking is so dangerous, but it is so important to consider both as well as like recognizing these tragedies and that some are always going to be inevitable in something as dangerous as Mount Everest. Human beings are not meant to exist at 29,000 feet. And so there are always going to be accidents and they are tragedies. I do also think it's important to look at trends, and that's kind of like what we're speaking to here. And I think the rescue piece you brought up is super important. Again, there is the side of the coin that's like, I am so like, some of the helicopter pilots in Nepal are my really good friends, and some of the work they're doing is really high risk and phenomenally impressive. And so there's one way to look at these rescues like, wow, like thank goodness some of the best pilots in the world are working in some of the most amazing machines ever built by humans. And rescues are happening higher and higher on the mountain, and lives, for sure, there would have been far more deaths without the helicopters on the south side. We know of multiple rescues above 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet, that had those rescues not happened, carrying someone down probably would have taken too long. And there would have been additional fatalities. So that's remarkable. And I understand why we're like making kind of heroes out of our rescue groups working on the south side of the mountain. At the same time, the numbers of rescues and the risk being put into them clearly show that inappropriate decision making is happening on the mountain, and it is going way too far. Like, we knew by mid-season of dozens of helicopter rescues above the icefall. The north side, while much less busy, we don't have helicopters yet. I hope we one day have a helicopter, but I hope it never causes the level of rescues that are happening on the south side, because since we haven't had a fatality. I think the last fatality was in 2019 on the north side. Before that, it was a number of years previous to that. By not having a helicopter, expedition operators are forced to be more conservative, because we know it will take us 24 hours to rescue someone instead of 24 minutes. We turn people, in general, people are turned around earlier on the mountain based on that, and that's keeping people alive. And so I absolutely think we have to look at, if there were actually 100 rescues in the season on the south side, like, there is nothing appropriate about that decision making. The vast, vast majority of people should be walking down off the mountain. And if we are in the realm of 100 rescues, we're talking about, like, 20% of the people on the mountain, or maybe 10%, including workers and foreign climbers. So 10% of the climbers in the mountain being rescued. Like, even when we make fun of rescues in the Alps, like, and how many helicopters are flying around every day and how much further we can push the sport because of that, ratio wise, we're talking about a tiny fraction of 1% of climbers or skiers are rescued by helicopter. And having been a part of some rescues, we're reprimanded. Like, even though we're encouraged to use them, guides are reprimanded. The cases are studied when there's a rescue, and guides can go to jail when accidents happen in the Alps that are based on negligence. Like, there is still a very serious process that goes behind utilizing a helicopter, because helicopters are dangerous. And I absolutely believe that is not currently happening on the south side of Mount Everest.
I'm not going to cut in. I'm going to let you keep going on this soapbox.
Well, and then frostbite changes lives. I've seen cases of frostbite amongst good friends over my life, over my career, and they are devastating injuries. They can be, you can still live a very full life, of course, but they are devastating injuries, and they should not be taken lightly. And this is going to get back to expedition guiding and commercial guiding versus professional climbing. I think when someone chooses to go and do something massively, like, potentially out of the realm of like normal climbing, and they perhaps they're a professional athlete, perhaps they're a recreational athlete, but they have built the experience to understand that they're going to that edge, and they get frostbite. Like the climbers on Janu last year, I think 2 of the 3 got frostbite. I can imagine a climber making a decision like, this is worth it to me, and I understand the risk, and I'm going to push to that level. And whether they consider it a success or a failure when they come home with frostbite is up to them. When a client, a non-professional climber, hires a mountain guide or an expedition leader to manage risk for them, unless I'm missing the fact that that expedition leader is sitting down with that climber and saying, 10% chance you're going to go home with frostbite and lose some fingers or toes. 90% you're not. Is that cool? And they've said, yep, that's cool. Unless that conversation has happened, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't, frostbite on a commercial expedition being led by mountain guides or expedition leaders is an absolute failure. It is a hands down failure. And there might not be negligence involved, but it should be a pretty rare case. And so, like, when we're hearing, on the south side of dozens of cases of frostbite being treated by the Himalayan Rescue Association, and on the north side, like, I'm not, like, this isn't like a north side versus south side thing. On the north side, like, I saw 50% of teams on the mountain, and Alpenglow wasn't one of them, 50% had clients with frostbite. And to me, and it's one of the things the Chinese government brought up to us at the end of the season, was we were one of the only companies that didn't have frostbite on our teams. And they, wanted to discuss why that was, which is a great conversation to be happening. Like, frostbite is a failure and needs to be learned from. And it's hard when people aren't being forthcoming about having these incidents. It makes sense why they're not. Like, Alpenglow occasionally has incidents in the mountains, accidents, and we discuss them deeply internally. And there is a whole process for debriefing, learning, of course, insurance, reporting, things like that. And we don't necessarily put it on our social media. To be very clear, we had no incidents on Everest this season. But I think a more open discussion needs to be happening about these things, at the very least, so clients can go in more aware, and hopefully mountain workers also can go in and understand the risks of working with one company versus another company. We've been hitting up the HRA to see if we can get data from the Himalayan Rescue Association, but they also don't want companies to stop bringing sick and injured people to them. And there are, I'm sure, health, medical, et cetera, challenges. But this is something we need to be talking about. Dozens of cases of frostbite on Mount Everest in a single season is crazy. And, this is not just third person reporting. It's actually like it's very easy to see someone with frostbite, unfortunately, because the one cases we were seeing on the north side of the mountain, it was down lower on the mountain where someone's wearing a t-shirt, but they're expedition mittens. There's only one reason those mittens are on.
Yeah, and I think frostbite's a really interesting one in that obviously there are degrees of frostbite, right? And so often frostbite gets brushed off as frost nip or a tiny little bit of frostbite on the tip of your nose or on the tip of your toe or on the tip of your finger, and it's brushed off. And I think it's important to recognize that there is no controlling how frostbite is going to progress. And as soon as you start to enter that frost nip phase or a tiny little bit of frostbite, you can't say, oh, I have 20 more minutes before this gets bad, right? There's no like, oh, we're on the clock now, let's keep going. It's like, there's no way to manage that injury. And so I think it's an interesting one in that, dozens of cases of frostbite are the severe cases, and how many, more cases of frost nip or close to bad frostbite were there? Probably, dozens more, if not, nearing hundreds.
Yeah. So to be clear, when I'm talking about frostbite that might lead to the loss of a digit.
Yep.
Likely will lead to a loss of a digit, fingers or toes. A little bit of like nip here, like that's the Everest tattoo.
But how do you differentiate that when you're on the mountain? And that's the issue, right?
Absolutely.
Like, it's not like as soon as you show a spot, you're on the clock, right? It's just like, you can't control these things. And you talk about like cutting edge alpinists and, the guys on Janu that suffered more severe frostbite. I remember reading an article, like they didn't realize that they were getting that frostbite injury. They realized that they were pushing the limit and that was their intention. But they didn't realize the severity of the injury because it's in a glove, it's in a mitten, it's not visible, and it's cold. It's what happens first when it's cold, you lose feeling. And so that's where professionalism and professional mountain guides and experience come in to manage that, because a client is not necessarily going to know like
Absolutely.
right away. Oh,
Where the
all of a
line
sudden
is.
I have frostbite.
Yep. And a lot of it actually has to do with the decision making that happened hours or days before, right? It's choosing which day to go. How much wind is there? Did you have good nutrition throughout the climb? Are you hydrated? Is your gear appropriately fit? And do you have enough experience to know what appropriately fit gear feels like, especially with boots? All that decision making happens before to avoid being in the position where we're on the edge. How much are you going to run out of oxygen up there is a huge one that I didn't just mention. Is probably the biggest reason people get frostbite is they end up stuck in lines or taking too many hours out and end up either having to turn down their oxygen flow or even run out. And then frostbite happens really, really quickly. So yeah, frostbite, I guess that leads a little bit to what was unique about this season, I think, in terms of big picture unique. This season was a unique season in that the jet stream didn't get pushed north by monsoonal storms until the very end of May. And so traditionally what happens is the jet stream, right, is this huge wind, 100 plus mile an hour wind, sits somewhere above 25,000 feet, 30,000 feet. It's usually above Everest. It's not actually on Everest, but it's close enough that we get a lot of wind on the mountain itself. In April into early May, the jet's always right around Mount Everest or a little bit south even and you're on the cold side. And usually summit pushes happen when the jet gets pushed north. And it usually starts this dance in May where a storm will bump it, it'll go north, and then it'll come back and be on the mountain again, and then it'll get bumped again and move north, and then it'll come back, and finally it'll get pushed up for the whole summer. But when that happens, usually big storms are sitting on the Himalaya, so it's still not climbing time. But the time you want to climb is during the bumps when it gets pushed north before the storms come. There's this nice, dry, quiet, low wind period. And there's usually 3 or 4 of them through the season. This season, what happened is the jet didn't get bounced or pushed north until the very end of the month. And what happened, which I've seen it for a number of years, teams starting to rush either because they're selling fast expeditions or there's a herd mentality where when one team goes, everyone wants to go. Or maybe there's some pride amongst expedition operators to be like, I got done early. Maybe people just want to go home to summer and showers and family.
Well, I also think it's a little bit of human instinct, right? Like you are selling this product, and when you see an opportunity to capitalize on or to, deliver on what you sold your clients on, your, human instinct is like to go, right? And I think one of the questions I had for you, I don't know if it was on the podcast or offline, was like, were you ever nervous when you didn't see a really good weather window a little bit earlier in the season? And I think you said no, but there was maybe a tiny bit of hesitation because I think it's human nature to like, oh, I see a tiny opportunity. Let me take it now so I don't miss it down the road, right?
Sure. Yeah, that unknown of what comes later is scary. But what happened this year is the vast majority of teams, 90% of teams, decided not to wait for what may be, like you were saying, a better window later. A window that I think experienced expedition leaders had a lot of confidence or would have had a lot of confidence would come, but people chose an earlier window. The south side also has a bit of an additional challenge that the icefall doctors will close the Khumbu icefall when it gets too warm because they think it'll become too dangerous. And no one knows when that date is. So I'm sure that was a part of the calculation on the south side that wasn't happening on the north side. But all this is to say the vast majority of teams decided to go when the jet stream was still sitting over the mountain or just to its south. And forecasters were yelling and screaming about the risk of this. Like there was no surprise. Like no one should have been surprised that they had a windy summit day, because what people were trying to catch were things models were showing where it's like the jet's still here, but the GFS shows that there's a 4-hour window when the wind drops. Not because the jet's not there anymore, but because all these other factors that figure into it, what makes wind, right? Time of day and sun and lots of other things I don't understand. But like, so you might be able to catch this lower wind window even though the jet stream is still here. And of course, what happened is some people did those models, those much more localized models, did work out and people got reasonably low wind summit windows. And a lot of people didn't because the model didn't pan out and the jet was still there. And instead of 25 miles per hour of wind, they're on the summit in 50, 60, 70 miles an hour of wind. And on supplemental oxygen, in today's technical gear, it is possible to summit Mount Everest in 50 mile an hour winds. And it's even possible to not get frostbite as long as everything goes right. And as long as you're one of the fitter end of the spectrum. There's a spectrum, right? On Everest. It's our job to get a spectrum of people up the mountain. Everyone's got to meet this minimum bar for whatever your company says is the minimum bar. But there's always still going to be a spectrum from that to whoever your fastest climber is, or your strongest climber, or your most experienced climber. Well, the problem is that on those hard days, the person at this end of the spectrum with the most experience and the most fitness and having the best day, no gastro issues, no upper respiratory issues, whatever it might be, gets up, gets down, has an amazing photo to show on Instagram or a windy video. If you take a look at Instagram, it's pretty funny how windy some of the videos are. The problem is the other end of the spectrum, whether it's a client or a worker who's having a tough day, a Sherpa or a mountain guide who's having a tough day, that person might still get to the top. A lot of them don't, and they turn around. We heard so many turnaround stories this year, so many sad climbers that didn't get to stand on top because they took their shot and it didn't work out. More importantly is the ones who took their shot, got up too high, ended up in frostbite.
Yep.
And we saw, there's no doubt in my mind, we saw so much of that because it was these windy periods that were not actually great summit windows for non-professional climbers.
Yeah. Well, we've spent 30 minutes talking about our first of 4 topics. Are we in for a 2-hour episode?
Much.
We got the juiciest one coming last. No, it's great. Tell us about Anya.
Yeah, well, so we knew, that first topic was going to be kind of heavy, right? So a lot of failure, a lot of frostbite, some death, a lot of just poor decision making going on is what I saw. Even though I'm so psyched, lots of people went home summited without frostbite, and I'm sure are so proud of their accomplishments, and they should be. Funny Absolutely. Thing is, a lot of people might have made Everest harder this year than it needed to be, but I love hard things and I love people doing hard things. So congratulations to all the people that did go to the top, regardless of how your day was. I bet it changed your life. And one of the happy stories, is this German woman named Anya. Anya Blacha summited Everest. She was one of 2 people this year to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. Both were on the south side. One was an Ecuadorian climber who did it actually during one of these pretty marginal windows. And from everything I understand, the forecast worked out. He was strong enough and pulled it off. So that's rad. Anya has been slowly doing all the 8,000 meter peaks without supplemental oxygen in a pretty not huge social media way. I think all climbers know her, 8,000 meter peak climbers, but if the mainstream might not. This was her 12th 8,000 meter peak without supplemental oxygen. She, tries to climb with as little support as she needs. Of course, she's on a normal route with trail broken and fixed ropes and all that. Same as I did my climbs without supplemental oxygen, so no shade being thrown on that. But she waited. She was patient and didn't go for any of the early windows. She, as far as I understand it, she knew she needed a warm day for her body, not on supplemental oxygen. And she summited on the same day that Alpenglow actually did, May 27th. We didn't actually see her on top, but we heard she was going, that there was no oxygen climber. And I wanted to mention it, number one, because climbing without supplemental oxygen is so hard. I think there's still less than a dozen women have ever climbed Everest without supplemental oxygen. Even when you've done other 8,000 meter peaks with oxygen, it doesn't say that you're going to be able to do Everest without. That extra 300 meters, couple hundred meters is totally transformative for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who have climbed a lot of other 8,000 meter peaks without oxygen that have failed over and over and over again on Everest. And I just think it's fantastic. The 12th, she's on track to do all 14 without supplemental oxygen. She'd be the 3rd woman to do that if she's successful. And every time I've run into her in the mountains, she's just been psyched and strong and putting the pieces together.
Right on. That's a good feel-good story after our last topic.
Exactly. So with that, we could dive into the next like rough topic. No, no oxygen. I think it's something that we might talk a little bit more when we talk about Xenon. But like to me, I in no way think Everest should be closed to oxygen climbers and only for no oxygen or only for the purest style. No part of me believes in that. At the same time, as we start getting more and more technological advances that make climbing Mount Everest easier, I think it's super important to acknowledge the differences, to be very clear about what we as an individual climber did or didn't do. And, like climbing Everest without supplemental oxygen is the hard way. It just is. It is remarkably, remarkably harder than climbing with supplemental oxygen. And so I think we should keep that out there as like a really cool mark, like kind of high mark, like when we do talk about style and accomplishment and things like that on the mountain. So cheers, Tanya.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly it's notable when someone climbs any 8,000 meter peak without oxygen, but in particular Everest, it's something worth discussing.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference.
That kind of brings us into our next topic, the FKT attempts. There were two gentlemen kind of working together on a project, kind of doing their own thing kind of together. Carl Egloff and Tyler Andrews. Tyler, we've had on the podcast. Both were attempting to climb Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen and set a speed record on Everest. I believe they kind of had separate objectives. I believe Tyler was hoping to just set a one-way speed record, and Carl's objective was to set a round trip base camp to base camp speed record. And we can, in our news section, we talked about FKTs and where that FKT should begin. We can save that aspect of this conversation. But Tyler and Carl, neither of them were successful in reaching the summit or setting their speed records. I think they were somewhat plagued by the weather and potentially making attempts early on in the season that weren't favorable for not only a no oxygen climb, but also a speed attempt where things like going light and fast are so important, and potentially not having the appropriate equipment with them to manage the winds and other factors given the small weather windows. So kind of an interesting season. I think Tyler went for an attempt early on in the season, around maybe May 10th, May 11th, made it to Camp 3. And it sounds like he might have had some equipment malfunctions around Camp 3. Who knows if that's the real story or if something else was going on. But something happened, and it sounds like he spent about an hour at Camp 3 and kind of aborted his attempt from there, just knowing that he'd taken too long at that camp to really have pride in the record that he is seeking out. So he aborted his attempt, went back down. Later on, both Carl and Tyler, I believe, made an attempt. And given the weather, given the conditions, Tyler chose to use oxygen for this attempt. And so it kind of was not going to follow his original goals and his original plan, but he felt it sounds like the attempt was worth attempting with oxygen, but the weather and the conditions were not conducive to a no oxygen attempt. Carl did, it sounds like, set out without oxygen, and Carl turned around Camp 3, or maybe even a little bit below Camp 3. And wow. Tyler, I believe, made it up to Camp 4, but ultimately did turn around as well, even with oxygen. And then I believe later on, Carl might have aborted his whole season after that attempt. And Tyler, I believe, made another attempt without oxygen again and made it somewhere up high, but didn't make it to the summit. And kind of an interesting, comparison of two styles and two strategies with a vastly different experience in the two gentlemen that we're speaking about. And unfortunately, neither of them were successful, but at the same time, they both, came down, as far as I know, without frostbite, without a near miss, and, had success in the fact that they returned home safely.
Yeah, that's a great place to kind of like finish that summary. Is they did both make the decisions they needed to come down safely, to go home. No one on the teams were injured as far as I know, because they both had support, but no one on the teams were injured as far as I know. And I didn't hear, of course, I don't think either of those guys got frostbite or anything like that. So, people love to say, oh, they succeeded. When I used to fail on mountain, when I failed on Everest, people were like, no, you succeeded, you came home. So that's a nice feel good, but it's also bullshit, right? Like, I think we got to acknowledge our failures. These guys failed.
Yeah.
And Carl's a real friend. Tyler, like you said, has been on the pod. Like, I have a lot of respect for both of these guys, but I think it's also really important to and they both have, own the failure, talk about the failure, put it out there. Like, they chose to, these guys got massive amounts of press through the season because I think, again, like what you were talking about in our news segment, it's very clearly understandable, kind of like FKTs, fastest known time, speed climbs, easy for the mainstream to understand, led to a lot of press. I think that's totally fine, telling your story in real time and telling people what your goal is. At the same time, that means it is very important to kind of own the failure at the end and be like, this shit is hard. And that's the main thing I took from, texting with both of these guys as the season was going on in real time, as well as seeing the updates on media, as well as experiencing and learning more at the end of the season, is climbing Everest is really hard. Climbing Everest without supplemental oxygen is one of the hardest things you can do on the planet. Climbing Everest without supplemental oxygen in less than 20 hours
from base camp,
base camp to base camp, is just an incredibly high bar. And the likelihood that one or both of them was going to fail at even just climbing without oxygen, never mind climbing without oxygen at a record pace, that was by far the most likely outcome. And that's what makes the goal so rowdy and rad and out there. And when the record does get broken by one of these two or someone else, that's why it's notable and special. So, I love it. I of course, I wish for them as friends that one or both had been successful, but the fact that it isn't feels exactly appropriate to me. And, I hope the learning they took out of this season gets reapplied, because I think some people will look at it and be like, I failed because of gear, or failed because of weather, or failed because of too many people on the route, or failed because of they didn't get to go to China where it would have been easier to succeed, but failed because permits are hard. That's the whole point. The fitness piece is actually the easy piece of achieving big things in the Himalaya. It's the easy piece. The hard piece is all the other puzzle chunks that have to come together to make it happen. It's I used to hear people, I've tried to ski the Lhotse couloir before Jim and Hillary did, and a number of pro skiers have tried to ski the Lhotse couloir. And I used to hear people be like, if only I had it in the conditions they had it in. And it's that's the whole point. It's hard to get all the pieces together at the same time. And so that's a big piece I see with this, is now they've gained, neither had ever been on Everest before.
So I wanted to dive into on that real quick. If I'm correct, Carl's first time on an 8,000 meter peak was in 2023 with you, or 2022? Was it, which year was it?
It was 2022. On Makalu with me.
And so that was,
when was my kid born? I'm pretty sure it was 22.
Yeah, I think so too. And that was Carl's first time in the Himalaya on an 8,000 meter peak. And I believe that Tyler's was the following year, also on Makalu. Does that kind of ring a bell?
So it was 2023, not 2022. I'm putting my dates together.
Okay.
Pretty sure
for
now.
You and Carl. And then maybe
for me and Carl.
It was last year.
Tyler went to Manaslu.
Oh, Manaslu.
And attempted to break their FKT on Manaslu. He was ultimately unsuccessful to break the record, but did summit without supplemental oxygen, I think, on his second try. And Carl did set a record on Makalu, but it was one of those interesting FKTs about where you started, where you finished, what route you climbed. But again, second try, failed the first time, did it the second time, and it was incredible to be a part of. Like,
oh, I can only imagine.
Super impressive.
But at the same time, both Carl and Tyler have only experienced 8,000 meter peaks in the last 2 years.
That's right.
And all of a sudden are making an attempt on Everest, which they'd never been on. Is there a part of you that is like surprised by that?
I don't know about surprise. It's really hard to raise money as a relatively like unknown athlete. Neither of these two had huge sponsors, even though they're very deserving. And like, it's really hard to raise money. And I can't imagine an easier way to raise money than saying, I'm going to go to Mount Everest and set an FKT instead of Mount, let's say, Kanchenjunga, that no one's ever heard of.
Yep.
And so going to the world's biggest stage, kind of like in 8,000 meter peak climbing, does make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, and I got to chat with both of these guys as they were planning for this trip. Like, they both knew they were taking a big step, and there were huge unknowns. Maybe a little less so for Carl. 8,500 meters on Makalu is a lot closer to 8,900 meters than Manaslu being one of the lower 8,000 meter peaks. Yeah, and so, but they both knew going in that there were loads of unknowns. I thought the step was appropriate because they did have a large safety net around them, and they were making smart decisions on how they were setting up everything based on their inexperience on Mount Everest. But it is an interesting point to think about, like, and how much better their chances will be next time.
Absolutely.
So that's exciting. One other thing just in your summary that popped out to me, and again, this is just an opinion, but that's what this podcast is for. I get to give opinions. Like, making an FKT on Everest or another 8,000 meter peak with supplemental oxygen. I'm not sure if Tyler ever intended that, although certainly his social media read that way. Like, that's not a thing, or at least I don't want it to be a thing. Like, if you're doing a FKT, you're moving into that like professional athlete realm.
Yeah, and substances that give you an advantage. Should we just dive right into the next topic?
No, I mean, I think I want to finish my thought. Like it just, number one, of course, it's a substance. It's a performance enhancing drug, hands down. Number two, the level that you take of oxygen, especially at this high level of like sport where your heart rate actually is going quite high and things like that, like, it just completely changes the playing field. So I think
you
it would
can't
be
say
the same.
You got an FKT on a 2-liter flow, not an FKT on a 4-liter flow.
Exactly. It just gets a little ridiculous, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the benefit of it is as great as, you being carried by a horse or a yak or a helicopter. Like, and so it just doesn't make sense. So, like, no one's asking me, but I'm saying it anyway. Let's make sure FKTs are no oxygen. And again, I think any sort of record setting on these mountains as an athletic record should be done without supplemental oxygen. That is not to take away from, you should be able to climb these mountains with oxygen. You should be able to be very proud of your ascents, and they are still really hard and dangerous. Not taking away, two things can be true at the same time. All of that is true. And if you're trying to set a record as an athlete on an 8,000 meter peak, it should be done without oxygen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, in my comfortable couch in California, I felt like they should have waited for a better weather window. But at the same time, it was cool to see Tyler essentially abort his attempt and abort his expedition, but still try and gain experience by climbing to the top with oxygen. I think that was like an admirable decision that he made. Not necessarily taking, ridiculous risk, and more just recognizing that the weather was not in their favor. And there was an opportunity to capitalize on where he was and set himself up for maybe more success in the future. So, again, I think they should have waited longer, but it's easy for me to say when I'm sitting here in California.
Yeah, and it's easy for me to say while sitting on the north side of the mountain, but like, I mean, of course, someone who's climbed Everest without supplemental oxygen, someone who failed on a cold day and succeeded on a warm day the next year, as someone who has seen dozens of expeditions on 8,000 meter peaks and what works and what doesn't work, it killed me to see these guys try on the days they did.
Yep.
But I'm sure there were many factors involved that I was not privy to. And they
certainly some media pressure.
Got to shoot your shot. And they went for it. And like you said, they came down safe. And I bet they learned a massive amount. And I guess that's the positive way to end the story is like, I can't wait to see what comes next for both of these two. And with the amount of media around it, there's no way other professional climbers with running backgrounds aren't also considering now. Climbers have considered this forever. I've known so many climbers try to break the record. Killian Jornet, Chad Kellogg, Sherpa, so many more. But like, I hope this brings more people in with the skills, experience, and speed to set these records. And I'll tell you what, when the record does get broken, I think it's going to be like, the flashing LCAP thing. Like, it's not going to get broken only once.
No.
Like, this record, I think, whatever it is, whether you believe, whichever story you believe, it's 20 to 24 hours. Like, I think we're going to see many hours taken over that, off of that through my career on the mountain or through the next decades on the mountain.
Well, I kind of mentioned this in the news section, I think, but like, are you really chasing an FKT if the person that set the last fastest known time wasn't really chasing an FKT? They just did something fast. So like, I think now it's being established that an FKT is being chased. And once that time gets dropped substantially, which it will, then that's when the real fun begins.
Heck yeah.
All right. So should we talk about performance enhancing drugs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great window in. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the story of the season. And I think, obviously maybe not the story of the season when you were on the mountain, but from the media standpoint, from what we're seeing at home, there were some notable fast climbs, and these fast climbs were not FKTs of the mountain, but they were fast climbs in that people were going from their home country to climb Mount Everest to the summit and back to their home country in a substantially lower amount of time than previously done. This is a cool one for us because you were actually a part of kind of two record-breaking fast climbs in this sense in the last 5, maybe a little bit more than 5 years. And so I know we'll just start off. You were part of I believe it was a 21 or 23 day Choyu and Everest climb. So we're talking 21 or 23 days, doesn't matter anymore because it's been just destroyed, door to door from home country to home country. And then you participated in a roughly 14-day home country to home country climb of Mount Everest. That would have been in 2019. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
With Roxanne Vogel.
Yeah, and even going back before that, I mean, I guess, like for better or worse, and I think it's for better, like, we and I essentially pioneered the first step in these faster climbs by being the first people to use hypoxic pre-acclimatization tents in a larger sense on the mountain, being the first company to sort of be like, let's try this, let's do this, shortening the Everest expeditions from 70 days to 35 days. We started doing that, over a decade ago now, 2013. And within that, as far as we know, and again, all of these things, and, I wish the media was more careful about this stuff now. We should be saying, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people from a lot of different countries out there that something might have happened in the 80s that I don't know about. But I've researched very deeply faster climbs as we developed our rapid ascent protocol and then our lightning protocol and Alpenglow expeditions. And as I did things as an athlete and wanted to kind of claim them or whatever. So really quickly, a few highlights. Like, I'm pretty sure we were the first commercial expedition with clients to ever do a less than 30-day climb. That was in 2013, successful 28 days, USA to USA. Then, like you said, actually the next thing was I decided as an athlete to see if an 8,000 meter peak could be done USA to USA in less than 2 weeks. And in 2016, Emily Harrington and I climbed and skied Choyu door to door, less than 14 days. And that kind of set the bar. And we're like, we could do this on Everest as well. Another stepping stone in there was me and two Sherpa doing 3 8,000 meter peaks in 10 days. And that wasn't USA to USA. That was just in the range. And we proved that could be done really fast, back-to-back climbs with oxygen. And then the climb you mentioned, 23 days, Choyu and Everest, USA to USA with clients, commercial guiding. And then Roxanne Vogel, 14 days, USA to USA with supplemental oxygen, Everest, north side. That was the fastest climb.
As we know.
On Everest. I'm very confident of that one.
And so
because it was a media story. And so there was a lot of research done, an Himalayan database and all the rest. So 14 days, Roxanne crushed it. And at that time, before you continue, we had this big discussion of, should we go faster? Can we go faster? And we're not unique in this, we and other companies all discuss, there's no reason with supplemental oxygen, a week-long climb, kind of a natural thing to think about, a week-long USA to USA should be possible. But the thing was, and the reason we've turned down every client who has thus far asked for a week-long climb to Mount Everest, is because we didn't think we could do it without putting oxygen on lower on the mountain and without potentially increasing the flow rate of oxygen. And this is where style comes in. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this. To me, I wanted to see someone do a week-long climb while still not putting on oxygen until 7,000 meters, because we believe it's far safer if you wait until that point, and to still not turn the flow rate higher than 4 liters per minute. Because at 4 liters per minute, the vast majority of humans who have done the training and work and have the fitness, they do have the physiology to safely be able to climb the mountain on 4-liter flow. Anything beyond that is taking something that can be done physiologically if you put the time and effort in, and just making it easier. And so that's the line we drew. And Alpenglow, I'd love to run a week-long climb for someone, but we haven't to this point had a member who has both the fitness, the skills, experience, and really importantly, the risk tolerance to know that by doing it in this style in a week, waiting for a weather window, and then flying in, you don't necessarily get a second chance. And so, you've, of course, reduced your likelihood of being successful if you stay on that criteria that I mentioned. And no one's been like, yep, I don't care that I'm dropping my success chances from 80% to 60%. I want to do it in a week in this style. And so we've never done it. What happened this year is a company, Furtenbach Adventures, and 2 companies, Furtenbach and Elite Expeditions, decided to attempt week-long climbs of Mount Everest with clients. And what I'm sure we're going to get into is they decided to do it by changing the rules, a very strong statement, by making it much easier.
Yeah. So, this all kind of started, as far as I know, when Furtenbach Adventures announced that they were going to have a lightning ascent of Everest, where 4 climbers from the UK
lightning is actually all a word. You got to be careful. I think they call it.
Is it TM'd?
Maybe.
Flash.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. So their Flash expedition was going to be UK to UK in 7 days. And the kind of interesting additional component there was that they were going to go through multiple rounds of huffing xenon gas, which increases IPO.
Are you a journalist here? You're using huffing? That's a pretty negative choice of words.
Isn't that what
Isn't that what a high school kid does?
How do you?
They were administering xenon.
Oh, sorry.
Gas.
Yeah, I didn't realize I was talking to a doctor here. Don't you huff xenon gas?
Just gotta give you shit.
Anyway, they were taking xenon gas, which, since it's a gas, you have to take it by huffing it, right?
Maybe that is a technical term. I don't know.
Anyway, they were taking xenon gas, which you might be able to explain the science better, but it basically allows you to acclimatize faster, produce more red blood cells extremely quickly. And I believe, were going to administer xenon gas to these climbers once in the UK and once in Kathmandu. And then I believe they were taking supplemental oxygen from Kathmandu all the way to the summit of Mount Everest and back at a high flow rate. You mentioned 4 liters per hour earlier, and I believe they were on 8 liters per hour. And they were successful. And so, all this hype, all this conversation was, an interesting PR stunt that actually worked out. And they made a round trip from the United Kingdom to the summit of Mount Everest and back in 7 days. I think they were 5 days to the summit and then 2 days back. So that's where the story begins.
Yeah. So, well, a couple of things. If this is where the story begins, one, probably I need to adjust your facts a little bit.
Please do.
I think it is important. Like, I think what we'll come across in this conversation is like, I have a lot of doubt about Xenon. And so, we're hoping to get Lucas Fernbach on the podcast to present his sort of perspective, because that's the whole point of this podcast, is to like learn more and chat about things we disagree about. Lucas is a peer and we work together, and he's certainly a smart guy. And so he has different feelings about Xenon than I certainly do. And it would be interesting to hear both sides. But so the quick fact adjustments, I think they ended up getting Xenon in the UK and then Germany and not Kathmandu. We can find out more from Lucas, hopefully, about that. I'm not sure how many treatments there were. And the oxygen flow rates, honestly, are like rumor from the Sherpa grapevine. So we should find out.
Cool.
But a very important piece is, you mentioned Xenon increased EPO, which increases red blood cell counts really rapidly. That science is absolutely not clear. And that's a very important part of...
So I should have just said allegedly.
Not even allegedly. I think the one study that has been done showed no performance enhancement or red blood cell increase, but definitely a dramatic increase in EPO, but a short-term dramatic increase. EPO is the hormone in the blood that tells the blood to make more red blood cells. But as far as I know, the science from our expedition, Dr. Monica Pires, but also from Peter Hackett, is that the tie to actual any increase in red blood cell count or performance was not shown in the one study that's been done. But what we do know is Russian Olympic athletes, especially hockey athletes, but potentially other athletes as well, were using Xenon as a potential performance enhancer. And that's why it was ultimately banned by WADA. So while that tie is not definitely proven by science, is it possibly true? Sure. But I think for people, I also am not a doctor or a scientist. So for people interested in the specific science behind it, Steve House, Uphill Athlete Podcast, did a podcast, 2 parts with Peter Hackett, kind of one of the 2 or few foremost high altitude doctors who do research in the space. So he could speak more to the science and what the studies have or haven't shown. All that to say, Xenon is this like thing that caught the total imagination of the media, because it sounds very space-like, right? No one even knows what it is. Noble gases.
How you take it, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Incredibly expensive, many thousands of dollars per bottle. It just caught the imagination of everyone and became the story. And I think, I've read some of what Lucas has put out, and he's working with a researcher in Austria. And this idea that it might somehow protect the brain at altitude is like fascinating and should be studied. Like, that's great. Maybe Xenon one day will be utilized like dexamethasone or Diamox for the either prophylactic treatment of altitude sickness or the actual treatment when someone gets altitude sickness somehow on the mountain. We all carry Xenon and give each other. Like, if that turns out to be true, and I assume they must have some preliminary research or they wouldn't say it, like, rad, awesome, go Xenon. 2 things. We don't have any of that knowledge now. And Xenon caught in my opinion, Xenon caught the interest of the media because it is so foreign sounding. In my opinion, it had nothing to do with the 1-week climb.
And the proof of that is...
Or at least anecdotal proof. Remember, one data point does not make proof, Sam. But go ahead, because it's exactly.
Yeah, I mean, following the success of the Xenon team, the flash ascent of Mount Everest, there was a climber from New York who climbed successfully in 5 days from New York to New York. So kind of smashed this little 7-day cute record that lasted for a number of days.
And flew further.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Go
I think
America.
What you're kind of alluding is the fact that like you believe, and I think there's a small amount of potential proof once it's replicated time and time again, that the flow rates and the use of oxygen from a lower altitude starting point is what allowed for the successful rapid climb of Mount Everest, and Xenon was a non-contributing factor potentially.
Yeah, and so the elite climber was very clear that he used oxygen from base camp. So he helied into base camp, put on oxygen, started climbing. And we also...
And this is elite expedition was his expedition operator.
Operator, right.
Not an elite climber like a professional athlete.
Sorry. Yeah, correct. In fact, part of his story in the media has been really clear that he's not a professional. Look what's possible. And we also don't know his flow rates yet. My guess is they were greater than 4. And the big thing was putting on oxygen very low. Both teams also talked a lot about using pre-acclimatization tents, hypoxic training. And we should just mention that. They actually talked about how many hours they did in the tent. I was like, shoot, I don't know how many hours my guys do. They do 2 guys and men and women. Like they do 2 months in the tent, 8 weeks before Everest, 8 hours a day.
Roughly.
Someone can do that math and tell me what it is. 60 times 8 and 200. I should be able to.
Don't embarrass yourself. You're live.
Oh, God.
Maybe you need more Xenon for brain development, brain recovery.
Apparently, altitude. It's a lot. And so clearly pre-acclimatization works. We all know that now, even though, again, there's not super like blind controlled studies. There's not a lot out there, but data points over thousands of people. But so we know the pre-acclimatization, of course, helps with acclimatization. But again, and this is where we probably need to talk about oxygen and what climbing Everest is all about. I don't think they needed to do the pre-acclimatization. And I am the foremost speaker and believer of pre-acclimatization.
Interesting.
You need pre-acclimatization to acclimatize without supplemental oxygen to an altitude that makes for a reasonably safe climb on the mountain. If you put on bottled oxygen at high flow at lower altitudes, you don't need to pre-acclimatize. The oxygen that works at 29,000 feet also works at 18,000 feet. It also works at 12,000 feet.
Would you say, though, that the pre-acclimatization gave them some sort of safety net if there wasn't a malfunction of the oxygen system? They're essentially...
cut you off. I'm so excited.
Essentially, they're going to be... a little bit more resilient should there be an issue with the oxygen delivery system at 28,000 feet or wherever that issue happens.
It's an awesome consideration, and I don't want to say no. So let's defer to yes. Of course, they were acclimatized to, let's say, 18,000 feet is what we find the tents to be really effective to. We've tried to acclimatize much higher, and it's not really effective. So they were truly acclimatized, body changes to 18,000 feet. And so I agree with you, Sam. That does add a safety margin up higher.
Still small,
but here's the
something.
catch. I've had through basically the oxygen system failures that we experienced due to a manufacturing defect in 2018. A whole lot of teams experienced that defect. I had the opportunity to see both members and Sherpa and mountain guides who were acclimatized not only to 18,000 feet through pre-acclimatization, but they were truly acclimatized to 7,000 meters, 21,000 feet. I saw the oxygen get turned off in a sudden catastrophic way at 28,000 feet. And the majority of people up there could not have gotten down or survived for very long without getting back on bottled oxygen very quickly. People immediately lost the ability to put their devices on ropes, they almost immediately lost their ability to speak clearly on a radio. The effect is very, very rapid. And so would the 18,000 foot hypoxic acclimatization actually make them safer for an oxygen failure up high on the mountain? Probably not, but there's somewhere in that mountain range where it made them safer. So
absolutely,
it's still a good thing. I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but I want to focus on the fact that like all this talk, and now I've seen like, oh, well, a climber uses Diamox, so what's the difference between that and Xenon? It's all bullshit. It's the oxygen that made the climb possible. It's the supplemental oxygen that made the climb possible. And so 2 more things on Diamox, dexamethasone, stuff like that, and then we can talk about oxygen. The other thing is there's been a bunch of media like everyone uses these things. That's not true. Professional climbers in today's world, I think all agree that we should not be using performance-enhancing substances while attempting athletic achievements in the big mountains.
And so you mentioned
oxygen,
Diamox and dexamethasone. Diamox is not a performance-enhancing substance, and dexamethasone is.
Yeah, we still endeavor to use none of them.
Absolutely.
But I don't think most people in our sport, again, I should maybe only speak for myself, but I don't think most people in our sport would say acetazolamide, Diamox was cheating because it's not a banned substance. It's not considered performance enhancing. It directly assists what your body does naturally, and its effect is tiny. Dexamethasone, corticosteroid, banned substance, the effect is quite dramatic. I actually have taken it on one mountain, full disclosure, a mountain called Pumori, in a very unique situation where I decided to essentially enhance my performance and try to go to the summit. And I was honest about it. And that asterisk is next to my name. I didn't summit anyway. So I know the effects are quite significant personally, as well as what I've seen across many rescues. Oxygen is a performance enhancing substance. An athlete attempting an FKT and all these things like we talked about wouldn't be using it. A recreational climber might. And I think Xenon just fits into that whole panoply. Is that the right word? Like, it might turn out to be performance enhancing. It might turn out to be safety enhancing. And so just, I hear things where people are like, everyone takes Dex. There was a period in the early 2000s where a lot of professional climbers were taking Dex. And I think there was a period in the 80s where all the professional climbers were taking methamphetamines. But now there is an ethic in the sport not to do those things. And then our clients look to us to be really clear about what these things are and aren't. And I think it's completely reasonable for clients to potentially use Diamox, to use oxygen. Could be fine for them to use Xenon once we know more about it. Dexamethasone is an interesting one because most teams, including my own, we use Dex only for someone to go down instead of to go up.
For emergencies.
Its performance enhancement is great enough that we want to save it as a tool because it's not necessary to climb the mountain when you're on supplemental oxygen. So we want to have it as a tool if it's needed to help someone get down in an emergency, kind of like the higher flow rate. Our regulators all go to 8. No one on our teams climb above 4. That extra 4 liters is for an emergency. It's the rescue component. That is changing in the industry, and I disagree with it. But I think it's really important to understand. The same thing with clients about climbing to 7,000 meters first. If you can get to 7,000 meters without supplemental oxygen, the vast likelihood is any health issues or high altitude issues you were going to have would happen in that range. And it's much more possible to rescue someone, whether it's by Sherpa or a helicopter, below 7,000 meters than above. So we've used that getting to 7,000 meters it's a huge part of our safety system because we've tested people. So when they get to, let's say 8,500 meters, that's a made up number. But when they get to 8,500 meters and the difficulty becomes the same as 7,000 meters without oxygen, they're less likely to have that heart attack, pulmonary embolism, altitude issue, all these other things, because they've already been tested in a place where a rescue could happen. So it doesn't happen for the first time at 8,500 meters, where rescue is mostly impossible.
Interesting. And so 7,000 meters has become that kind of standard. But as you mentioned, that number, similar to the flow rates, is also being challenged by other operators around the world, really. I mean, we're seeing oxygen being used on Aconcagua, which tops out below 7,000 meters.
Yes. So there, absolutely. And I do think we're seeing more rescues up high, frostbite, accidents, things being chalked up to heart attacks and all these different things because of those changing companies choosing to bring people up with changing standards. With all that said, there's then the purity style piece.
I mean, we almost don't even need to get into it, right? Like, if you want to go for purity and style, you go without any, you don't go without oxygen, you go without xenon, you go without dexamethasone. Like,
yes, but. Yes, but, Sam. I mean, I've obviously had a lot of time to think about this with dozens of interview requests about the 1 week climb and why we didn't do it when we are or were the industry leader in moving things faster. And I think I've used this on the podcast before, so apologies to everyone I bore. But to me, I do think everyone should climb Mount Everest in whatever style they want.
For sure.
For sure. And for me, not for a lot of people, but for me, that includes, if it can be done safely, 8-liter flow, putting oxygen on from Kathmandu, helicopter as high as it'll take you on the mountain, helicopter as low as it'll
gas?
high as. Sure, if and when it's proven to be an effective aid. We have no idea right now, and this did nothing to prove it, to your point. Peter Hackett said the way to test xenon gas is to attempt a no oxygen climb with xenon gas. That's the same way the ultimate test of pre-acclimatization hypoxic tents was when all of us no oxygen athletes started using them. And, I think I climbed Everest USA to USA without supplemental oxygen in like 38 days. And 10 years ago, no one would have thought that was possible.
Yeah.
That's what proved that I was able to pre-acclimatize to 18,000 feet, not turning up my oxygen flow. That tells us nothing. So xenon, I hope more people, play with it, and more people with more experience. So we can say, this is how I climbed, without oxygen, without xenon gas. This is how I climbed with it. We can start to get anecdotal evidence, as well as I hope science does research projects. But Monica always really reminds us, no one's putting in the hundreds of thousands of dollars necessary because no one cares. Unless the military cares, that's usually who tests high altitude stuff because they need potentially to fight in high altitude areas. The military tests it, we'll get data. That's how we finally got data behind high altitude pre-acclimatization tents. The military did tests. And it was like, oh shit, it works, because they can do controlled tests over large numbers and budget's less of an issue thanks to our tax dollars. So xenon, if it turns out to be a great use, people should use whatever they choose. I'm not done. I'm not done. Don't cut me off. But to me, so here's the example I've used probably here before, but certainly on other interviews. To go to the South Pole, right? Traditionally, the hard way, the Everest no oxygen way, you took a boat to the coast and you went for 60 or 80 or 90 days. People are still trying to do that today. And every time it's done, it's like climbing Everest without supplemental oxygen. It's super notable and it gets written up in magazines and online because it's hard and the vast majority fail. That's the hard way. You can also go to the South Pole by flying a Twin Otter all the way to the South Pole, getting out and getting handed a glass of champagne and touching the ball that's at the South Pole. That might be xenon and oxygen to 8-liter flow. And then there's the in-between. There's something called the last degree. And this is what most non-professional Arctic adventurers do with commercial operators. They fly to the last degree from the pole, and they do that last stretch. And it might take 8 days or 10 days or 11 days. And it's hard. They have to pull sleds, and it's super cold. And many fail, and many succeed. And it's super rad for a non-professional Arctic explorer to go home and to have had that experience. even though you can fly all the way and just grab the ball and drink the champagne, and even though there's a pure way that professional athletes are doing from the coast. This is exactly that to me. And so we already know what the hard way is without supplemental oxygen. This, I think,
shouldn't the hard way be from sea level? Come on.
I don't think that makes it dramatically harder. It makes it like a story. There was one this year, right? The bike from fuck knows where and swam the English Channel and did all this. Is it a cool stunt story? Amazing experience?
I'm just giving you a hard time.
No, but I think it's notable. We can always do these rad record setting things. But like, I think there's this clear hard way.
Yep.
And then I think what we're seeing developed, forget the Xenon for a minute, even though hopefully Lucas can tell us more about why he's such a believer in it, but forget about that. There is a way that's essentially, I keep saying on interviews, like it's like getting in the spacesuit. 8-liter flow, helicopter, or Jeep on the north side, if we get to this on the north side someday. Fly in, start walking. You wait for the perfect weather window. It's not exactly an expedition. And you're going for a hike. Is it a Colorado 14er? Is it, choose the thing you choose. It is like, it's 3 days, maybe 4 days. And it's potentially a beautiful experience. Like, I'm not taking anything away from the people who fly to the South Pole. I bet it's one of the key experiences of their life. And I think this will be too. And there will still be risk because it's still Mount Everest. But that experience is not what I believe changes people. And the reason I think Mount Everest matters is I have a reverence for it because the vast majority of people I've seen and experienced climbing it with, from mountain guides to professional athletes to Sherpa to clients, they come back changed because the outcome was truly unknown and they were pushed physically, mentally, and emotionally to their limits. And that's where Alpenglow's bar is. And I can only really speak to Alpenglow's bar, right? And the reason we're not changing Alpenglow's bar is I think it is the experience that my clients are coming to me for. There might be other people out there that just want to stand on top and you can't yet fly to the top. So you do it with 8-liter flow.
8 liters and get as close as you can.
Right. And you put on oxygen from the very bottom. But the people who come to me now, I think, and who are certainly going to come to me after this interview come out, are the people who want a very real, very as safe as possible opportunity to do one of the hardest things on the planet with an unknown outcome while not being professional athletes or professional climbers who have dedicated their lives to this. And that is 4-liter flow starting at 7,000 meters. And that's why I'm not changing, even though that means my members have to look. It happened on the north side this year. Look right beside them while they're working their ass off, watching someone on 8-liter flow go flying by them. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. The last degree. That's your style.
The last degree.
Well, it was a super interesting season. Obviously, the media flocked this story. It was it still is all over the media and it is cool. There's no doubt that when things like this happen, it is worth the attention that the media is giving it. But it is cool to also hear your perspective and get your thoughts on it. And your thoughts are not just like what Adrian thought when he woke up this morning. It's like you have experience doing this, finding that line, pushing that limit, finding what feels comfortable and what feels right to you. And not to say that that's like the end all be all, but it's a really valuable perspective. So I appreciate you taking the time to share it.
I appreciate getting to give it. Emily is so sick of hearing me
I'm sure.
talk about these things. So is my dog. So is my kid. So I'm glad I get to do it with you. And I appreciate you saying it's valuable. And really, I do, I know we're wrapping up, I do think there are different styles to climb the mountain. I do think all are valid as long as we're maintaining safety for our staff, for our workers, and for our climbers. And as long as we're being super honest, so people can kind of establish what those differences are and where they want to be on the spectrum, what's important to them. So I wanted to repeat that.
And I'll make one more plug. Like a lot of these things that happen quickly often consume more goods along the way. There's more oxygen bottles used if you're on 8-liter
Way
flow.
more.
Tents are often forgotten because you're moving fast. You're doing this, with a different goal in mind. And I think on top of, doing it safely, keeping the worker safety in mind, also leaving no trace on the mountain.
Yeah, and I've seen certain media try to relate like somehow being less time on the mountain is going to lead to less resource, which means it's more environmentally friendly. I'm here to say that's bullshit. And I'm a company that runs faster trips. Like a faster trip means more support. The support is still there for the long term because in order for you to go fast, someone else has to build all your tents and carry all your loads and establish all the fixed line. So there's more resource. And then even when we go faster, kind of to your point of what happens if there's a failure, like when we go faster, we add our buffer of how many oxygen bottles are on the mountain, how many oxygen masks, all of it has to be better. The logistics have to be more redundant to support the faster timeline. And so anyone who's suggesting this is somehow more environmentally friendly or better for the mountain, no way, no how. It's not true. So yeah, there's that. And then the second thing I was going to say, other than it's important everyone climbs in the style they're proud of and get the experience they want out of it. And that does mean the mountain's going to get more busy. And I'm okay with that as long as someone is setting standards of what safety and leave no trace ethics need to be applied. We still have a lot of work to do there, but that's the problem to fix in my mind, not saying you can only climb in one style or this style or that style or less people. There's not going to be less people on Everest ever. It's only going to go one direction. Same as your local surf break, same as your backcountry ski location, same as your ski resort. It's only getting busier because this shit's rad and we've done a good job of showing how rad it is. So more people are going. The second thing I was going to say though is like really like I want to be very, everyone knows this, but this is my opinion, my podcast, my opinion, our podcast. But like, I really do hope we can get a different perspective. So, Lucas, you and I are going to have talked before this has come out, but I certainly hope we have you here to discuss the other side of it, your perspective and why you put so much energy and time into this. And with all respect, we want to hear it and give our listeners that perspective as well as, everything I've shared. And then, we've had Monica on before and we can certainly do the doctor thing again, because neither Lucas nor I are obviously medical experts, but
I mean, I know how Xenon's delivered. So clearly I'm the foremost medical expert here.
I hope what came across in this is less to do with medical to me and more to do with all these other pieces of what made this work, number one. And number two, why we didn't choose to do it or haven't yet.
Yeah. Well, it was a great climbing season. There was some good stories, some challenging weather, but all in all, it was a good climbing season on Mount Everest. And this is our little wrap up. Next episode 32, we're going to have Mike Pond, who's an Alpenglow guide who got his first opportunity to climb Mount Everest for his first time and had success. So we'll get to hear a little bit more about Alpenglow's adventure, Alpenglow's kind of season on the mountain, and Mike's personal experience going to the tallest point in the world for his first time. So that will be episode 32. And thanks for listening. We'll have to hear some Duffel Shuffle stories next time.
Talk to you next time, Sam. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. You can follow along on Instagram, where we post our favorite clips from each episode, as well as more about the world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Catch you next time, and until then, we hope you enjoy some time outside.